On a separate topic, Madam President, I just returned from the Munich Security Conference and a visit to our NATO allies in Poland and Lithuania. On the latter part of that trip, I was joined by Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, Senator Jeanne Shaheen of New Hampshire. Many here in this chamber have heard me talk about my connection with my mother's birth in Lithuania and the fact that I've cared about that country in a special way ever since I've served in Congress. Life was bleak and oppressive for the Lithuanian people and all the others in Eastern Europe living under the boot heel of the Russian Tsar. Countries such as Poland, which saw such devastation during World War II, found themselves suffering decades of communist dictatorship. So it was no surprise that when the Soviet Union finally collapsed, these nations were determined to join the community of democracies and NATO. In fact, the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, that helped lead this historic path to freedom. I remember so many aspects of it. In the shivering cold winter of 1991, millions of people joined hands to form a human chain connecting all three nations in the Baltic area. They called for change. Then on January 1991, the Soviets sent their tanks into Lithuania and Latvia and other places. The net result was deadly. Those Soviet tanks killed 13 innocent people and hundreds were injured. What were they asking for? Freedom, a chance to vote for their own future. Well, soon the Baltic states stepped out even further and courageously declared independence from the Soviet Union. They wanted to reclaim their freedom. I remember visiting Lithuania in those days, seeing sandbags stacked up outside their parliament, which they call the Seimas, and kids, school kids, who were taking a break from class to come pray the rosary in front of those barricades, light little candles, basically to be there for their country at that moment of testing. If this sounds familiar with what we're hearing in Ukraine today, it is. Those early days of independence had many brave souls coming forward with nothing but determination. Their small arsenal of freedom, as they called it, which they brought me in the back door to show me, consisted of a broom closet with about 8 or 10 rifles in it. They were ready to stare down the Soviets if necessary. I was so honored on this trip recently to visit with one of the champions of the restoration of freedom and Lithuania's first post-independence leader, Vytautas Landsbergis. Dr. Landsbergis, a music professor, was the leader of their revolution back to freedom in Lithuania. At 95 years of age, he remains a fierce champion of democracy, as he was in those early days confronting the Soviets. I also met with former Lithuanian President Valdas Adamkus, who left Lithuania for Chicago as a teenager and returned decades later to serve 2 terms as president and shepherd his nation of Lithuania into the European Union and NATO. I visited military bases in both Poland and Lithuania, where I met U.S. troops supporting the NATO mission to protect the young democracies of Eastern Europe from Russian aggression. Among the several service members I spoke were several from our state of Illinois, from Latham, Illinois, which is near Decatur, Montgomery, Illinois, near Aurora, and Kankakee. And they came and told stories of their service in the regular army and how they were now working in Lithuania to prepare their armies for any possible battles in the future. It's been a wonderful, strong relationship. In Poland, when you mention you're from Illinois, virtually every military officer says they've been our friends for a long time, and they have been, because for over 20 years, the Illinois Guard has been in direct contact with the Polish military forces, modernizing them and preparing them for any challenges that might come. Eastern European allies know the Russian threat far better than we do. Look at these maps of Russian troop movements in and around Ukraine and the borders of our NATO allies, as you can see here. Russia, Kyiv, Kharkiv, Mariupol, they're in the news virtually on a constant basis. You can see those troop movements, the hundreds of thousands of troops that are moving from the Russians' front into Ukraine these days. With the Russian troops now flooding into Belarus in the area up the far corner here, they are essentially taking over that country too. And the nations on the other side, Poland, you can see on that map, Poland, Lithuania and Latvia understand that the threat today is very real for them. They share a 60-mile border that connects the rump Russian territory of Kaliningrad with Belarus. And that Suvardi corridor is one that they're very concerned about keeping peaceful. It's a real threat, and they worry that the Russians are going to take this opportunity in Ukraine to extend their forces into Poland, into Lithuania, and into Latvia. Poland in particular is already generously hosting hundreds of thousands of Ukrainian refugees pouring across the border. It is an inspiration to me to see this country of Poland reach out to accept these Ukrainian refugees. The United States has to step into this picture with humanitarian assistance for Poland and all the other countries, Moldova and Romania and others, that are taking Ukrainian refugees. We've got to help them feed, clothe, and shelter these people during this period of invasion by the Russians. Quite simply, Russia is unleashing a brutal war of choice against a free nation that wants to choose its own path, the path of democracy. The result is sickening. This shows what's going on in the subways in Ukrainian cities. People bringing their children to escape the bombing that Putin is initiating above. We have many millions of people in that country in peril, and some are taking their kids and trying to escape to a safe place like Poland. There's been terrible destruction that's going on there as well. We've seen it on television regularly. This lady was in front of her own home at the time a rocket attacked it on February 25th. This is a picture which I saw in this morning's Washington Post. It is a most touching scene. You can barely see this father down here, covered in blood, bringing his daughter to this paramedic. The paramedic really tried to perform CPR on this little girl who was injured in the shelling by Putin and his troops. Unfortunately, she did not survive. That is the reality of what Vladimir Putin is doing today. The American people know it, and the strength and courage of the people of Ukraine resisting his advances is an example to the world. We're seeing celebrations across all of the world for the people of Ukraine. Eiffel Tower, Empire State Building. I'm going to have to move some of these charts around a little bit here. This one was especially impressive at the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin. Look at the crowds supporting the people of Ukraine. And it isn't lost on us, Madam President, because we have a wonderful Ukrainian community in Chicago. Here they are at the church on Chicago Avenue just this last week, and they've been coming back on a regular basis. I was there on Friday, and I spoke to many of these same people about the situation which they're facing in Ukraine. They would come up to me afterwards and say they'd been on the telephone with members of their family who were frightened for their lives, didn't know if they could survive this aggression by Vladimir Putin. When you think about what he has done, sadly he has failed on so many fronts. How could he get so many things so wrong? He has unified NATO and support for NATO in a way which was unimaginable just a few years ago. NATO stands unified now in defense of Ukraine and confronting the aggression of Vladimir Putin. He's also unified the European Union. Countries like Sweden, Switzerland, which famously have been neutral in most of these conflicts, are now openly supporting the European Union's efforts to put pressure on Vladimir Putin, sanctions that will stop him from this aggression in Ukraine. And he has certainly, in the process, destroyed the reputation of his country as a reliable partner in the future. The Germans had entered into agreement for a gas pipeline. Many of us questioned it from the start, but that was their decision. Nord Stream 2, to bring natural gas from Russia into Germany. Well, that pipeline is closed down now. Chancellor Scholz has announced he's looking for other sources, such as LNG, to replace the gas resources which were supposed to be sent in from Russia for a long time to come. It's going to lead toward more energy independence in Europe, independence certainly from the unpredictable and unimaginable Vladimir Putin. Madam President, I remember not so many years ago, 30 as a matter of fact, when countries like the Baltics and Poland were finally getting an opportunity for freedom. There were extraordinary examples of courage in each of those countries. I was lucky to be there to witness some of it. But what we're seeing now today in Ukraine is exceptional. The military experts thought they would last a matter of hours. Now it's days, maybe it's weeks. I hope it's months and even longer, because they have the courage to stand up. Ordinary citizens who are showing up at recruiting office for homeland defense, being given Kalashnikovs and other weapons and sent out to stop the Russians. You can see that they are inspiring the world as they should. And it's a reminder to all of us that Vladimir Putin and his brand of aggression has been seen so many times in history. When someone like him or Lukashenko in Belarus thinks they're so powerful they're above accountability. That is not the case. We've got to make certain as we go forward that we stand with the people of Ukraine, that they know we are their friends, that we aspire to the same values. And I want to thank President Biden for his leadership. I'm going to be calling on him with many others. The first thing I'm going to do is send a letter, which will be headed out this evening, signed by colleagues on both sides of the aisle. What we are asking the president to do, and it's within his authority, is to grant temporary protected status to Ukrainians now on visas in the United States. Some of them are tourists, some of them are students, some are on work visas, but oftentimes they expire and they're supposed to return to their home countries at the moment of expiration. If there are circumstances in those home countries, the president has the authority to give temporary protected status to allow them to stay in the United States. The senators who are joining me in this letter will ask President Biden to extend temporary protected status to the people of Ukraine who are on visas in the United States and are present in our country. That, to me, is a way to give them some peace of mind. We certainly wouldn't want them to return to that war scene that we've seen over and over broadcast on television. And there is more to do, whether it's humanitarian assistance to countries like Poland or whether it's lethal aid to help the insurgents in Ukraine defend their country. The United States needs to be there. Madam President, I yield the floor and suggest the absence of quorum.